Greetings and bienvenue. Welcome to Midnight Broadcast. Today's tale is melancholy instead of paranormal. Khalid represents the transition from adolescence to adulthood. Anon and his friends make a fine deal of an apartment that can fit into their financial situation. I present to you our apartment.
I'm going to bump this with a personal story for all of you. I had just graduated, and like most college students, had no money or job. Me and a few of my friends decided to go in on a shabby apartment together just until we get on our feet. Found this great 3-bedroom for cheap, but the landlord was extremely suspicious. No contract was ever signed, just required money up front every month. The apartment itself was nice, but very old, like something out of the 1920s, except for this one massive part of the hallway closet that looked like it was recently plastered over. Just an awkward white spot that nobody tried to hide or paint over. We asked the landlord about it and he just said it was from recent renovations. We knew this was complete bullshit, but we were desperate, and the place was cheap. Cut to a month later, we're all settled in and doing fine. One night we are watching TV when there's a knock at the door. 2 massive fudging Russians are standing at our doorstep. I mean like 6 foot tall, prison muscle-jacked guys. One was wearing a sailor hat and tank top which looked tremendously friendly, but at this point none of us were laughing. They asked about some guys, saying they owed them money. We tell them that we have been living there for a month, and that we don't know the men they are looking for. The Russians get visibly confused, but don't push the issue much further. Instead, they get in their car and just sit there watching our apartment for several hours. Now, this apartment was in a super shabby neighborhood. We're talking boarded up houses, drug dens, drive-by shooting kind of shabby, so nobody cared or took notice of some suspicious guys sitting in their cars for hours like us. Eventually we all got freaked out enough to call the cops.
I'm interested. How was the landlord suspicious? And how did you know what they said about the wall is bullshit? Also, friendly reminder that if you have a story to tell, please finish it. It can't be worse than most of if you tried.
Interest intensifies.
The landlord was suspicious because he didn't make us sign a lease or contract or anything. Just wanted the money up front. Also, he said that plastered hall was from renovations, when clearly nothing else in the apartment looked new or renovated. Of course, once the single cop showed up, the Russians flew off. We explained to him what happened, but he said there wasn't much he could do other than tell officers to keep a lookout for the car. The whole time we were talking, he kept looking around the apartment nervously, and finally, right before he left, he asked us,
"Do you guys live here by choice?"
We were a little freaked by the question, but told him we were just college kids looking for someplace cheap. He asked if we knew the story behind this place, and when we answered no, he told us what he knew. Apparently, a bunch of illegal immigrants had been living in this apartment previously, but had all been deported. Somehow, they had gotten wondering that the immigration police were coming mere minutes before they came. One of them had somehow managed to get into the spaces behind the walls and hide there for several hours as the police searched the place. The police made the hole in the closet trying to get to him, but he had escaped and was still at large. Of course, after telling us that horrific story, the cop left and we pretty much stayed up all night afraid a bunch of Russians were going to murder us. Next month we confronted our landlord, saying we knew about the illegals, and he begged us not to move out. We were probably the first tenants in years that had paid rent on time and in full each month. Anyways, none of us had any better options at the time, so we were kind of stuck anyway, so we stayed. Next post is when things started getting batshit crazy. Another couple of weeks passed and neither of us had seen the Russians again, so we were starting to feel more relaxed again, except for one of my roommate's girlfriend. She didn't live there, but stayed with us several times a week. One morning she asked if we had heard shuffling and scratching at night. We were all heavy sleepers, so we just wrote it off as typical odd noises in an old place. Only a few nights later I had fallen asleep on the couch watching when I finally awoke to head to my own bed. I also heard the scratching. It sounded like a fudging rats burrowing in our walls and ceilings. There would be several seconds of furious scratching, and then what sounded like pieces of wood or debris falling or settling. The next day, told my roommates, and that night we all stayed up together and heard the scratching skittering once again. We all concluded it was rats and called the landlord to hire an exterminator. The asshole took several weeks to follow through, so for the time being we just ignored the scratches, seeing as they only happened at night and most of us could sleep through it anyway. That, and none of us had actually seen any rats. Another night, we were all sleeping peacefully, when a loud boom woke us all up suddenly. It sounded like someone had dropped a fudging anvil on our ceiling. It was that loud. We all searched the place, but there were no cracks or broken items or any signs of damage whatsoever, so we just ignored it and went back to bed. After the big boom, we went almost 2 weeks without incident, but during that time the apartment started smelling terrible. At first, we just thought it was us. I mean, you had 3 guys living in one place, of course it's a little rank, right? We even spent 1 full day cleaning and washing everything. But the smell kept getting worse. It got to the point where walking into the apartment was like walking into a public restroom where someone had taken a dump and let it sit all day. At this point, we just harassed our landlord with endless phone calls until he came himself. Upon entering our place, he almost puked. Finally, the next day an exterminator came. The scratches had stopped, but one of my roommates made a video of it with his cell phone to show the guy. He said it sounded like rats, or possibly a possum, but said that usually they don't stink up a place as bad as ours. Now, we lived on the top floor of this apartment and the exterminator wondered if we had access to the attic. We told him no, and that we had never even been up there because the only way to get in was the tiny square door in the ceiling of our hallway that was always locked. The exterminator said he would get access to it from the landlord and return in a few days. Next day, I come home from work early, and to my surprise, I see those 2 fudging Russians waiting in their car again. I was really starting to get sick of all the crazy shit going on in the apartment, so I got my courage up and went right up to their window and knocked. They rolled the window down and asked why they kept watching us. They said they knew was lying about their friend. Screamed that I didn't know the guy who owed them money and said if they didn't leave us alone, I'd call the cops. In hindsight, I was probably really lucky they didn't shoot me or something, but the driver did give me a stern, pant-shatting glare. Before driving off, he only said 2 things.
We'll be back for your money.
Suffice it to say, I freaked the fudge out and told both my roommates. For the next 48 hours we acted like morons, one of us staying up to watch and shifts at night for safety. Finally, the exterminator came back with a key to the attic. We were all very on edge, so it didn't help when the exterminator looked into the attic for not even a minute before climbing back down and telling us to leave immediately and call the police. We did so, and only when the police came, did the exterminator finally say what he'd seen. As you've probably guessed by now, the missing Russian had died in our attic, which was where the smell came from. Apparently, he'd been living there for a while and using some makeshift tunnel and the spaces behind the walls to get in and out without us noticing. We never got the final word on how exactly he died, but I did learn it was slow and painful. The thing that still really ducks with me is why he never cried for help. He knew we were right there under him, but instead of seeking help he just lay there dying. Obviously, we had all had enough after that and moved out within the next week. Our landlord actually got arrested, but we never really found out what for. The day I was moving all my stuff out, I noticed the police had left the attic door unlocked, and I wanted to go up and see this place for myself during the day. It was very eerie. The space was tiny and cramped. Barely enough room to walk crouched down. You could see the insulation on the walls. The bed was nothing more than a ratty sleeping bag, and the only source of light were a couple flashlights. Wrappers and empty cans of food were just littered everywhere, along with plastic drink bottles. A garbage bag was filled with some dirty clothes, and it looked like the cops had taken or confiscated anything else up there. The most fudged up thing, though, were the little tiny holes drilled in the floor. There were 3 spread out across the space. When I bent down to look, could see our living room, kitchen, and bathroom pretty clearly. Don't know if the holes were just so he could make sure we were asleep, or if he was just actively watching us. Next to one hole was a clawed up section of floor with some blood. Like he was just scratching with his fingernails non-stop. I feel terrified thinking that he was dying and couldn't speak for some reason, and maybe his scratching was a call for help. I'll never know, but it had really fudged me up to this day. The only paranormal part of this story was the last night I spent there. I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, but in my way back, heard that familiar scratching in the walls. I left immediately, spent the night in a motel, and only came back during the day for my stuff. I've never gone back to that area since.
The next tale shown how far a man would go to avoid his debts, but sadly cost him his life. I believe that this anon has learned that if a deal is good, then there has to be a catch. How would you have handled the situation? Would you have confronted the Russians, investigate the noise? Would you have accepted the apartment with no questions asked? Please leave your thoughts in a comment below.
Thank you for subscribing to Midnight Broadcast. More Greentext from XR Farming, a new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight at Central Time.